The volatant tail stinger comes flying towards them with catastrophic velocity, completely shattering the stone aisle and triggering a massive eruption of smoke as destruction spreads rampantly through the corridor. Feeling the terrifying spectacle play out in seemingly slow motion, Subaru witnesses a petite young girl in a dress dive straight into the core of the vortex. Her vertically rolled hair flutters in the shockwave as she leaps into the destruction head-on. It is Beatrice. It is an act of pure courage, or perhaps absolute foolhardiness.
The young girl's build is naturally fragile, possessing far less capacity to withstand the brutal force of the tail stinger than a solid stone monument. Even acting as a human shield, her small stature wouldn't be enough to obstruct a direct strike above Subaru's chest. It seems like naught but an impulsive, utterly futile action, destined for death. It mirrors everything else in this nightmare. Just how a sobbing, broken Subaru had desperately grasped Echidna's sleeve, with a face stained with tears and nasal mucus. Just how he had ultimately called out Julius's name, who was being scorched in the hellfire of battle below. Just how he had tried to slam Ram's head into the stone wall, entirely failing to abide by the advice of the illusionary ghost in his mind. Now, Beatrice, too, completely overlooks the word impossible, stepping forward to receive and halt the stinger's deadly force. Subaru lets out a panicked cry as Beatrice rushes to the front. She firmly grasps his hand with one side, while holding her empty palm aloft ahead of them, screaming out her magic. Incomplete EMT, in fact.
The exact instant the young girl shouts her command, something invisible, a sudden, volatile current of pure energy, flows rapidly out of Subaru's body. Before his tottering, dazed head can even process the drain, a defensive screen of brilliant light materializes directly in front of Beatrice's pointing palm, violently blocking the tail stinger's incoming blow. The resulting shockwave gives the distinct impression that it's the last thing a human being will ever get to see. Yet, the barrier holds. With Beatrice's palm acting as the center of the defensive wall, the sheer kinetic damage is entirely unrolled onto the surrounding environment, perfectly avoiding Subaru and the others while destroying the corridor. The titanic scorpion doesn't stop at a single strike. The stinger rains blows upon them continuously, but every single explosive projectile is completely blocked by the tiny shield named Beatrice, deflecting the catastrophic damage safely to their rear. The terrible shockwave blows violently through the passage, and a flying fragment of the shattered aisle grazes Subaru's cheek. The noise of the world becomes distant. Squinting his eyes against the stinging pain in his face, Subaru's gaze is utterly robbed by the sight of Beatrice's back. He knows that the relentless barrage fired by that massive beast acts like a high-caliber mortar, capable of effortlessly turning a human body to dust. Yet, because a young girl with such a small build is standing as his shield, Subaru is granted the chance to pick up his life. Just moments ago, he had been kneeling in disgrace, desperately begging God for salvation from his unimaginable hell. Now, salvation is actively standing in front of him. Subaru has no room to curse his own misfortune. As he tracks the destruction from the corner of his eye, his awareness locks onto a third presence in the corridor, Echidna. She had been completely dragged into the crossfire of this attack. Earlier, she had declared her intent to part ways with Subaru and Beatrice, but because Subaru had physically restrained her arm right before the ambush, she was trapped in the exact same kill zone. Fortunately, she happened to be standing within the precise perimeter of Beatrice's defensive light screen, escaping the direct impact of the stinger. But that is where her luck runs out. What Beatrice blocked was merely the direct, front-facing damage of the projectiles. She has absolutely no way to defend against the secondary, structural damage the attack brings with it.
Echidna lets out a faint, terrified cry as she completely loses her balance and collapses backward. She frantically tries to step back to support her weight, but there is no longer a floor beneath her legs.
Shattered by the relentless bombardment, the stone aisle crumbles halfway away. The entire structure of the tower's corridor fractures, causing the floor, ceiling, and walls to catastrophically collapse into the abyss. Abandoned into the empty, unknown space of the atrium, a fatal plunge to the depths below is entirely inescapable. A sense of impending death levitates in Echidna's wide eyes. In a split-second reflex, Subaru steps forward and violently grasps her hand, stopping her from falling to her death. Echidna gasps in pure shock, staring up at him. "Natsuki-kun."
The human chain is locked. Beatrice holds tightly onto his right hand, while Subaru uses his left to anchor Echidna over the edge. Thanks to Reed's brutal, coercive surgery earlier, his dislocated shoulder has only barely been forced back into its socket. The injury is deep-rooted, and overusing the arm risks tearing it right back out of the joint. But without handing a single shred of responsibility to Beatrice, who is currently expending every ounce of her mana to catch the relentless stingers, Subaru braces his legs, gnashes his molars, and musters the entirety of his physical strength to hold back Echidna's dead weight. A guttural, straining scream tears out of his throat as he pulls. Despite her small stature, Echidna possesses the heavy, unyielding weight of a human being. Lifting a person with a single hand is an incredibly grueling task for anyone, much less a wounded, traumatized teenager whose anchor is actively being bombarded and whose target is too panicked to cooperate. Even as he pulls, the danger of her slipping into the void doesn't diminish. Understanding the immense risk without even needing to think about it, Echidna looks up at him through the dust, whispering for him to stop doing things that will make her misjudge his character. Subaru fiercely refutes her, shouting that he doesn't care about her assumptions and that his body had simply moved on pure instinct. Echidna authors a faint, exhausting smile, muttering that the reckless response feels exactly like the true Natsuki-kun. Turning her body around, she uses the leverage of Subaru's straining arm to somehow scramble up and plant her feet onto the remaining fragments of the crumbled floor. The moment she is safe, Subaru collapses his gaze onto his own left arm. He stares at the skin. The raw letters are still deeply engraved as bloody wounds, tracking through the black speckle patterns covering his flesh. His body is covered in fierce, white scars that he had carved into himself by his own volition. He realizes something bizarre. His muscles are moving with far more efficiency and strength than what exists within the limits of his memories. His physique has become subtly stronger during his time in this world, and that phantom strength is the only reason he narrowly managed to save Echidna from a fatal fall. Yet, his defective body still feels entirely too limited to execute his grand Book of the Dead plan. Echidna climbs back onto solid ground, turning a grim, frantic expression toward their protector. She shouts to check on her status, and Beatrice stiffens her lovely cheeks, responding through gritted teeth that she is rapidly hitting her absolute limit. The very next instant, a sharp, deafening screech echoes through the passage. The colossal scorpion, having finally ceased its rapid-fire bombardment, clings aggressively to the ceiling. It points its enormous, razor-sharp pincers directly toward their heads, letting out a terrifying battle cry. Subaru's thoughts begin to slowly wash away as the deadly claws close in. In ordinary human knowledge, scorpions are defined entirely by their venomous stingers, but out of thousands of species, only a few dozen actually carry lethal venom. What is the primary weapon of a scorpion that hunts without poison? It is the raw, cutting strength of its pincers. The sheer killing ability of this massive beast is undeniable. made painfully clear as its claws cleanly sliced through the remaining stone walls and floors of the watchtower, as if they were mincing tofu with a sharp knife. Before the blades can butcher them, Beatrice invokes her magic. Murak. She completely evades the oncoming massacre by executing an unbelievable, unnatural leap through the air.
Rather than a normal jump, she moves as if she is actively abusing and rewriting the laws of inertia, completely escaping the effects of gravity, with herself acting as the center of the field. Grabbing the lower back of Subaru and Echidna's clothes, she flies through the air, dragging them a massive distance away from the scorpion's reach. The moment they land at a safe distance, Echidna instantly goes on the offensive. She points the fingers of her right hand directly toward the monster's face, unleashing her spell. El-Jawald!
5 brilliant white lines of intense heat fire simultaneously from her fingertips. The beams mow down the corridor like the glowing claws of a giant, brutally scorching the face, the right pincer, and the thick shell of the scorpion clinging to the ceiling. Unable to endure the intense magical damage, the beast vehemently waves its stinger and remaining claw in agony. Slipping into the thick plume of dust erupted by the destruction, the scorpion retreats into the shadows of the rear passage.
Echidna refuses to stop, blindly firing beam after beam into the smoke, screaming the incantation over and over. Subaru is forced to rush forward, wrapping his arms around her to physically bind her hands, desperately shouting for her to calm down because the creature has already run away. Echidna struggles against his grip for a few moments, her eyes fiercely glaring into the thick plume of smoke, before her muscles finally relax. She surrenders her dead weight completely against Subaru's chest, panting heavily as she breathlessly asks if they manage to kill it.
Subaru shakes his head, staring warily at the settling dust. He tells her the monster isn't dead, but has merely retreated. Even as he speaks, his entire body is trembling with the primal fear that a sudden counterattack will fly out from the smoke at any second. He blinks, turning to Beatrice, asking what that terrifying entity even was. Beatrice adopts a deeply serious, tense expression, reporting that it was an incredibly powerful witch beast that suddenly manifested on the 4th floor. She connects the dots, pointing out the absolute chaos unfolding around them, violent tremors rocking the lower levels, a rogue witch beast invading the middle floors, and the massive systemic abnormalities occurring in the upper layers of the watchtower. Subaru's face turns entirely pale. Up, down, inside? Is this entire place experiencing a total collapse? Echidna slowly distances herself from his chest, standing alone on the shattered floor. She wipes the cold sweat from her forehead, turning a look of unyielding vigilance toward him. Her pale cerulean eyes are filled with a toxic mix of suspicion, anxiety, and deep perplexity as she delivers a chilling reminder. Though it seems you do not realize that one of those major problems is you. Subaru stands frozen as her words test the very basis of his thoughts. Echidna demands to know what he truly is, where his loyalties lie, and what he is ultimately trying to accomplish in this tower. Subaru mutters weakly, completely overwhelmed by her interrogation. He offers nothing but his same honest perplexity, telling her that he has absolutely no idea what is happening, and that he is just as lost in the dark as she is. He begins to mention his condition, but Beatrice cuts in, delivering the final verdict to Echidna. Amnesia. Subaru had only ever opened his heart about his memory loss to Amelia and Rom inside the stone room, which meant Echidna and Beatrice were fully aware of the ice cage and the excuses he had made. Yet, despite knowing he was a prime suspect, Beatrice was still actively choosing to stand as his shield. Echidna processes the information, her mind racing as she demands to know how he could possibly escape an airtight magical cell on his own. Subaru answers straightforwardly and honestly, admitting that the moment he regained consciousness, he was simply lying outside the bars with a broken shoulder. He doesn't expect her to believe such an absurd story, but at this point in the loop, piling lies upon lies has only caused reality to violently deteriorate around him.
He had already knelt on the floor and wept, begging God to punish his wretched existence. There is absolutely no point left in keeping up fake appearances or pretenses. Hearing his raw, unfiltered response, Echidna hesitates, a heavy silence passing between them. She closes her eyes, intentionally avoiding his face as she asks the defining question, "Why did you save me just now?" She points out the undeniable truth. If Subaru hadn't reached out his hand, she would have unmistakably plunged to her death, taking Anastasia's body with her into a tragic, regretful demise.
She forces herself not to look into his eyes, using the physical detachment as a last resort to ensure her logical judgment isn't warped by her emotions. Subaru ponders the question himself. Why had his body moved to save her? Was it simply because Julius had entrusted her safety to him at the edge of the atrium? Did those final, desperate words force his hand? Shaking his head from side to side, Subaru tenhas it. He admits that while Julius's request had made him try to keep her close, the split-second movement to catch her from the ledge wasn't born out of deliberate, calculated logic. He honestly doesn't know why he did it. He falters, whispering that in a world where everything happens so suddenly, not every single action requires a neat, pre-planned reason. Prepared to receive nothing but a cold, logical rejection from the suspicious girl, Subaru hangs his head. But instead, Echidna relaxes her tensed shoulders, letting out a soft sigh. She quietly murmurs that this exact, irrational selflessness might be the true, defining nature of the human being known as Natsuki Subaru. Subaru stares at her in mute, dumbfounded amazement. Echidna simply shrugs her shoulders under his gaze, pragmatically stating that standing around quarreling in a collapsed hallway is foolish, especially when a second witch beast attack could happen at any moment. She declares that they need to move immediately and find a way to reunite with Julius. Beatrice nods deeply in agreement, tightly grabbing Subaru's hand with her tiny fingers. Feeling that small, warm sensation, Subaru looks down at the young girl. Beatrice looks up at him, a profound gravity in her eyes, as she asks him if he truly doesn't remember taking her outside of her library. Subaru squeezes his eyes shut, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I don't know what you're talking about." Hearing the transient, heartbreaking note of loneliness bleed into Beatrice's voice as she responds, Subaru feels an overwhelming wave of guilt wash over his soul, as if he has just committed the most dreadful, unforgivable crime in the entire world. But Beatrice simply shakes her head, actively concealing her own lonesome heartbreak beneath a daring, resolute smile. She tells him that even if he has completely forgotten their bond, the memories are still permanently engraved within her own heart, and they will never fade away. She looks him in the eye, promising that even if he forgets her, she will always remember him, and she will spend every waking moment doing whatever it takes to help him remember who he truly is. The declaration is far too dazzling, far too pure for a wretched, isolated soul like Natsuki Subaru to endure. He wonders how many horrific predicaments this young girl must have overcome, and how many times she had to temper her heart into solid steel to wield a willpower this absolute. A profound warmth wells up in the depths of Subaru's eyes, threatening to break his composure entirely. Beatrice senses his internal collapse and silently squeezes his hand tighter, offering her tiny grasp as an unbreakable pillars of support. Echidna maps out their surroundings, noting that the path Subaru originally ran from has been completely obliterated by the scorpion's attack. The only viable option left is to advance directly down the remaining side of the aisle, the exact path where the monstrous witch beast just retreated. Beatrice looks at her, asking if she is truly willing to walk alongside a suspect. Echidna bluntly responds that debating over forgiveness, doubt, and suspicion is a luxury they cannot afford in an active crisis. She maintains that her suspicions regarding Subaru Cabra be cleared, but survival demands an immediate order of priorities, a corporate lesson she learned directly by watching Anastasia's side. The debate is officially over. Subaru avoids offering any further objections, choosing to entirely abide by the judgment of his two companions. The desperate urge to run away and hide still claws at his heart, but as he grips Beatrice's hand, he wants to believe that facing the danger is better than simply crouching on the floor and offering empty prayers to a silent God. The corridor behind them is a scene of absolute ruin, reduced to heavy piles of smoking debris and jagged wreckage. As they jump over the massive structural hole where Echidna had almost plummeted, the air begins to clear, revealing a grotesque object lying in the center of the path. Subaru lets out a low groan of disgust. It is the scorpion's massive tail, completely severed from its roots, with the lethal stinger still attached to the tip. Echidna examines the appendage, noting that since the creature deliberately left its primary long-range weapon behind, it explains why there was no immediate counterattack from the smoke. Beatrice nods, warning Subaru to watch his footing as they prepare to leap over the structural gaps. Subaru lightly jumps across the fractured floorboards, lifting Beatrice effortlessly into his arms. Her body feels incredibly light, far too light for any normal comparison. He can feel the fruits of a year's worth of intense training locked inside his own muscles, physical growth that doesn't exist within his wiped memories. But Beatrice's weight seems to exist entirely outside the laws of nature. As they land on the other side, Subaru's eyes drift back down to the severed tail lying on the stone. His mind begins to analyze the biological features of the object. In his ordinary knowledge of the real world, a scorpion's venom stinger is a permanent physical limb. It can't be used as a rapid-fire projectile launcher, and it certainly can't be regenerated if torn off. More importantly, looking at the catastrophic destruction of the corridor, the beast hadn't been firing physical stingers at them. It had been launching concentrated blasts of pure magical energy that merely took the form of a stinger. If the tail was simply a biological focus for invoking magic, then losing the appendage meant the scorpion was effectively neutralized. That was what his logical brain desperately wanted to believe. But suddenly, a cold, suffocating unease grips his chest. He notices a terrifying detail on the cross-section of the fallen tail. The limb had been severed cleanly from the root, but the wound didn't make organic sense. If it had been violently burned off by the intense heat of Echidna's spells, the flesh should be covered in thick scorch marks and melted chitin, just like the surrounding stone walls. Instead, the tail features a flawlessly clean, surgically perfect cross-section. Subaru freezes as the horrifying truth pieces itself together entirely too late. He frantically opens his mouth to scream Beatrice's name. On the floor behind them, the severed tail violently quakes with a sudden, unnatural start. An instant later, a blinding, apocalyptic light bursts wide open. In nature, there exists a biological survival mechanism known as autotomy. It is a phenomenon primarily witnessed among arthropods and lizards, often colloquially referred to as a lizard cutting its own tail. When cornered by a predator, the creature will voluntarily sever a part of its own body to facilitate a desperate escape. In the case of a lizard, the detached tail will continue to violently writhe on the ground, serving as a frantic distraction while the main body flees to safety. But this is a magical witch beast inside a cursed watchtower, and it has adapted the mechanism for a far more lethal purpose. When a prey approaches the discarded limb, the detached flesh acts as a literal proximity-triggered landmine, detonating with enough explosive force to tear everything in its vicinity to bleeding shreds. Subaru lets out a low, pathetic wail from the depths of his throat. He is steadily, agonizingly dragging his feet across the stone floor. The slow movement isn't born out of physical exhaustion. It is a mechanical failure of his body. A massive, deep tear has been ripped into the flesh of his left leg, and as blood continuously pours from the wound onto the floorboards, he has no choice but to limp forward. And Subaru isn't dragging his body alone. From beneath his arms, a weak, entirely breathless voice echoes in the quiet corridor. "I can't face her. This pain is my sole repayment to Anna." Subaru gnashes his teeth, hooking his hands under Echidna's armpits, desperately pulling her torso from behind as he tries to leave the scorched blast zone. The moment the smoke from the explosion clears, that monstrous scorpion will undoubtedly return to finish the slaughter. "Shit! Shit! Shit!" Subaru screams into the empty passage, tears of pure frustration bursting from his eyes. He had been entirely negligent. He had let his guard down the exact second the danger seemed to diminish, because Beatrice had spoken to him with such dazzling warmth, and because Echidna's sharp attitude had subtly softened. A fatal gap of comfort had opened up in his heart, and that single moment of weakness had cost them absolutely everything. He feels so thoroughly pathetic, so utterly useless from the bottom of his soul that he can barely stand his own existence. Why, when forced to stand before these life-or-death trials, does his character display zero growth? Hardships are supposed to be an opportunity provided by God to grow stronger. But if these trials consist of nothing but being violently beaten up, bleeding out, having your bones shattered, and watching your companions get slaughtered, then what is the purpose of human suffering? Echidna whispers with immense difficulty, her eyes closed as she begs him to leave her behind, because it's enough. Subaru screams back, his voice cracked with rage, shouting that nothing is enough. Echidna opens her eyes slightly, asking a heartbreaking question. "Between me and Beatrice, you would choose her, right?" The words are a sad, undeniable truth. If Subaru were forced to choose whose life carried more value to his heart, he would choose Beatrice every single time. The cosmic worth of human lives might be equal, but the sequential order of personal relationships is not. In a moment of absolute crisis, that order dictates your actions. But the choice has already been stolen from him. Beatrice isn't here. She is no longer anywhere in this world. The exact millisecond the scorpion's tail detonated into a flash of blinding light, scattering thousands of lethal magical stingers through the air, Subaru had frantically tried to pull Beatrice into his arms to shield her, but his reaction time was tragically, unforgivably slow. Instead, Beatrice had made her own choice. The moment Subaru reached for her, she actively threw her fragile body over his vitals, using herself as a literal shield to absorb the concentrated brunt of the magical explosion. She had protected his life at the cost of her own existence, leaving him fatally injured but alive, while she entirely melted away into the light. Subaru chokes on his own breath, the memory of her final expression permanently burned into his eyelids. Her eyes had looked so incredibly relieved, filled with an unyielding protective love for him, as she disappeared. It was an expression far too convenient, far too kind for a fraud like him to receive. The alternate personality, Natsuki Subaru, who had earned that girl's devotion, should vanish from the face of the earth, leaving no trace behind. Through the grim process of elimination, Subaru had dragged Echidna's mangled body out of the rebel. He moves on pure, frantic instinct, an act of desperation that feels like a pathetic attempt at atonement, or perhaps a desire to be rightfully punished by reality. But his frantic efforts are met with resistance from the dying girl. Echidna breathlessly tells him his actions are entirely pointless, her voice a husky, failing sigh. Her reasoning is absolute. Both of her legs have been completely blown off from the roots. By this point, the catastrophic wounds have almost stopped bleeding entirely. As Subaru pulls her frame across the stone, her torso feels terrifyingly lighter than even Beatrice's body. Without immediate, high-tier medical attention, there is no future awaiting her. Overwhelmed by the horrific reality, Subaru's footing fails. He stumbles over a piece of debris and crashes violently onto the floor, sending Echidna toppling over alongside him. For a moment, the heavy silence of the corridor is shattered only by the agonizing wails of two broken human beings, cursing their existence. Echidna weeps against the stone, crying out that the human body hurts entirely too much on the verge of death. Subaru frantically apologizes, his voice trembling as he begs for her forgiveness. But Echidna tells him not to apologize, weakly whispering that she no longer has the face to show Anastasia anyway. She views the agonizing pain of her mangled body as her sole rightful repayment to the soul whose form she borrowed. Subaru blinks away his tears, unable to comprehend. Repayment? Echidna loosens her lips slightly, explaining the dark mercy of her situation. If she were to return control of the body to Anastasia right now, the poor girl would instantly inherit the doomed white-hot agony of having her legs severed and the suffocating terror of immediate death. That would be a literal hell. Echidna believes it is only fitting that she absorbs the torture alone, falling into hell for her failure to protect her companions or aid Julius. Subaru can feel the sheer, blistering heat of self-derision and self-reproach burning through her words. He watches her lifeless eyes commence a visible, rapid countdown toward her approaching death. She is going to die right in front of him, leaving a powerless, incompetent fraud entirely alone in the dark. Subaru reaches out a trembling hand, but Echidna whispers for him not to make it easy for her, maintaining that she deserves to suffer. But her words instantly spark a new, terrifying choice in Subaru's mind. Make it easy. His reactions were too slow to save her, but accelerating her demise to shorten her agonizing suffering is a task even a useless coward like him can perform. Forcing his mangled body to stand, Subaru scans the floor under Echidna's fading glance. He reaches down and selects a heavy, jagged piece of stone rubble from the destroyed aisle, confirming its weight in his palm. It is roughly the size of a clenched fist, a primitive, brutal weapon, but more than enough to snuff out the final embers of a dying girl's life force. Kneeling back down beside her, he calls her name, but Echidna's eyelids remain tightly shut. She doesn't respond, but the slight stiffening of her cheeks and the pursing of her lips prove she is still conscious. She simply no longer possesses the willpower to fight back. If Subaru raises the stone over his head and swings it down with all his might, the nightmare will end for her. Suddenly, the sweet, echoing voice of Maylie rings out inside his mind. The phantom ghost notes with a dark chuckle that even she has never smashed someone's skull in with a heavy stone. But Subaru isn't doing this to harvest a book of the dead. The thought of reading her soul doesn't even enter his mind. He is acting purely as a suicide assistant, a grim executioner offering a merciful release to a companion caught in absolute agony. If anyone in this cursed tower holds the right to take a life for the sake of mercy, Surely it is him. It is his sole opportunity for atonement. And yet, his hand violently trembles. A suffocating pressure locks around his throat, freezing his lungs. Yet Subaru's body completely refuses to obey, as if his brain has entirely forgotten how to trigger movement. With a hussy, defeated sigh, the stone slips from his trembling fingers, crashing onto the floorboards with a dull, echoing thud. Conceding total defeat to his own cowardice, Subaru's knees buckle, and he crumbles into a pathetic heap beside her. He weeps into his hands, cursing his own existence. Can't you even do something so simple, Natsuki Subaru? He can't even offer a merciful death to a companion suffering right in front of him. His guilt is a farce, his words of atonement nothing but a cheap expedient to make himself feel better. Echidna slowly lifts her thin eyelids, her powerless, pale cerulean eyes locking Lakinga's knelt form. A faint, sighing whisper escapes her lips. For helping with suicide, you can't even clasp a stone? The weak accusation hits Subaru like a physical blow, and he draws his body back in pure shame, waiting for her to curse his weakness. But instead, Echidna's lips subtly loosen into a gentle, peaceful smile. Echidna whispers her final words into the silence. "Forgive me for doubting you." Subaru freezes. And before he can even begin to process the true intent behind her words, her final breath leaves her body. Echidna is dead. The weight of reality crashes down on his chest like a collapsing mountain. He had killed Meili and hidden her body, acted like a fraud while concealing his memory loss, sowed nothing but intense doubt among his companions, escaped a magical cage through self-mutilation, failed the final request of a loyal knight, watched a young girl melt away to save his wretched heart, and ultimately lacked the spine to offer a merciful death to a friend on the verge of demise. As Subaru kneels in the absolute depth of his own filth and disgrace, the girl he wronged offers him an apology and dies. Subaru stares into the empty corridor. He wants to die.
He wants to delete every single second of this horrific loop from existence and cease to exist. He wants the entire world to point their fingers at Natsuki Subaru, branding him a toxic plague that deserves the absolute death penalty. He despaired upon himself, realizing his very existence was a sin against the universe. He surrenders entirely to the dark. Despair acts like a literal physical parasite, feasting upon and systematically eroding away every single shred of Natsuki Subaru's heart. He cannot move. He has absolutely no right to move.
He knows that even if he forces his legs to stand, his presence will only cause more destruction. It has been mathematically proven by reality. Natsuki Subaru has definitively proved his own utter incompetence. No, calling it incompetence is far too kind. He has proved that he is an active jinx, a walking pest, a literal angel of death to anyone who dares to care about him. When absolute despair nests deep within a human chest, it kills the heart, consuming and ruining the soul long before the physical life force ever fades. Once that boundary is crossed, standing up becomes a physical impossibility. Fighting back becomes a joke. When a man realizes he is the genuine, undisputed source of all the agony surrounding him, total paralysis is the only logical consequence. I want to disappear. I want to vanish into nothingness. He should have made the choice much earlier, long before he ever set foot in this terrifying fantasy world. He should have known that his mere existence acts like a cancer that troubles other people's hearts. No matter how small a space he occupies in the lives of others, he has absolutely no right to it. He is a filthy wall stain, an existence equivalent to the dust accumulated in the dark corner of a room, like the maggots that swarm over a pile of pure garbage, like a hideous, permanent scar stamped in an eye-catching spot. Natsuki Subaru, why won't you just die? Even if he dies, all that awaits him is a forced reset to do it all over again. Who decided that was the law? Who ensured that his torment would continue eternally? If dying once isn't enough to pay for his sins, then he wants to die 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. He wants to die until he completely disappears from reality. He wants to die until his name, his existence, and every single lingering vestige of his life are entirely erased from the memories of everyone in the universe, until he can no longer affect a single soul. Suddenly, a phantom voice whispers through the dark, "I love you." Subaru screams in his own mind for the voice to shut up, to erase him, to let him vanish. The voice grows louder, multiplying through the void. "I love you. I love you. I love you." He begs for quiet, demanding that the present stop blocking his path to non-existence. He wants to be smashed into a million unaligned pieces, to leave behind 0 traces, to become an anomaly that never existed in history. He wants his name completely wiped from the memories of everyone, even the young girl who just promised she would never forget him. He is worthless, meaningless. He has nothing of value to leave behind. He wants everything to vanish into nihility. The voices cascade into a deafening, terrifying chorus, an endless, suffocating wall of sound, echoing through his soul. "I love you. I 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 love. The hollow, manic confession of love pours onto his consciousness ceaselessly, drawing closer and closer to bestow a twisted punishment upon the garbage, taking the form of a crouched, weeping human. Subaru realizes that if he allows himself to be swallowed by the dark entity, he will finally get his wish. He will disappear. He will sink into a profound, absolute nihility, far greater than mere physical death, abandoned forever in a convenient, dark space where no human eyes can ever reach him. If I can finally die there, then I will gladly surrender.
As Natsuki Subaru prepares to plunge completely into the all-consuming despair painting out reality, a sudden, crystalline sound cuts straight through the black shadow. That's as far as you go. A single voice chimes through the corridor, a voice that sounds exactly like a silver bell, completely denying the end of the world.